Elizabeth Williams thought she was being hired to translate a sealed legal document. She was wrong, because the man waiting for her 42 floors above Seoul wasn't supposed to be charming. He was a billionaire shipping heir under house arrest, surrounded by guards, lawyers, and enough secrets to ruin everyone in the room. But when Elizabeth walked through that black door, she found him barefoot, arguing about rice cakes, and smiling at her, like he'd been waiting all day. She didn't know it yet, but someone had already photographed her badge outside that building. And within hours, her name would appear in a file that had nothing to do with translation. But before we step through that black door with Elizabeth, if you're already wondering what this mysterious billionaire is hiding, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss what happens next. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? And do you think Elizabeth is walking into a simple translation job, or something far more dangerous? Now, let's go back to the beginning. The car dropped her at a service entrance she hadn't known existed, wedged into an alley off Cheongdam-dong, where the buildings leaned close enough to swallow the sky. No sign, no number, just a black door and a man in an earpiece who looked at her ID like it might be lying to him. Elizabeth's palms were damp against the strap of her bag. She wiped them, once, quickly, before he could see. "Elizabeth Williams," she said. "I was told to. We know who you are." He didn't smile. He didn't need to. The elevator doors opened behind him like they'd been waiting for their cue. 42 floors up, the doors parted onto marble and glass, and a silence so complete she could hear her own pulse in her ears. She had pictured this moment on the ride over. A cold room, a colder man, someone who'd look at her the way people looked at hired help who hadn't quite earned the room they were standing in. She'd rehearsed her posture. Spine straight, chin level. You belong here because they need what you have. She had not pictured shouting, because rice cakes in gochujang sauce is a vegetable dish. Taehyun, I don't know what to tell you. It is not a vegetable dish, sir. There is no vegetable in it. There's scallion. Garnish is not a food group. Elizabeth stopped in the doorway of what she assumed was meant to be a study. Floor-to-ceiling windows, the city spread out gold and glittering below, a wall of legal binders that looked like they cost more than her rent, and found the notorious Choi Jae-won, barefoot on a leather sofa, one ankle monitor visible beneath rolled sweatpants, gesturing with a phone at a man who looked like he hadn't slept in a week. He looked up, caught her standing there, and instead of the cold assessment she'd braced for, his whole face opened into something startled and delighted, like she was a good surprise instead of a scheduled appointment. "You're early," he said. "You're barefoot," she said back, before she could stop herself. "I'm under house arrest, Ms. Williams, not under dress code arrest." He was already on his feet, crossing the room with an ease that didn't match the ankle monitor, didn't match anything she'd read in the file her agency had handed her with a stiff "don't ask questions" attached to it. "Choi Jae-won. Though I assume you already knew that. Given the..." He gestured vaguely at the guards, the elevator, the entire apparatus of secrecy that had delivered her here. "Theatrics. I was told there'd be a document." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Sealed. That's all I was told. There is a document." He said it like a confession he found mildly funny. "There's also dinner, if you're hungry, and an ongoing dispute about whether tteokbokki constitutes a balanced meal, which you're welcome to weigh in on, since apparently everyone else in this apartment has terrible taste." Behind him, Taehyun exhaled through his nose in the specific way of a man who had had this argument before and lost every time. Elizabeth felt the corner of her mouth twitch, traitorous, and fought it flat. "I'm here to translate a document, Mr. Choi, not to referee your diet." "Jae-won," he said it lightly, but something in his eyes held for half a beat too long, like he was checking whether she'd flinch. "Mr. Choi makes me feel like I'm about to be scolded by a teacher, which, given the week I'm having, might actually be an improvement." She didn't answer that. She set her bag down instead, pulled out her laptop, tried to remember the version of herself that had walked in here 5 minutes ago with her spine straight and her plan intact. That version felt very far away already. The document, when he finally handed it over, sealed, Exactly as promised. Her signature required on 3 separate confidentiality pages before he'd even let her touch it, was as cold as she'd expected. Dense legal Korean, shipping manifests, references to accounts she didn't have clearance to understand the shape of. She worked in silence at first, the kind of silence she was good at, the kind that let her disappear into the words and stop being a person in the room. It lasted 4 minutes. "You're frowning," Jae-won said, from somewhere over her shoulder. He'd folded himself into the armchair across from her, chin in his hand, watching her the way other people watch television. "I'm concentrating." "You're frowning while concentrating. It's very intense. I feel like I'm being graded." "You are, actually. Badly." She didn't look up. "This clause here is either a shell transaction or your accountant has never heard of a thesaurus. Both are possible. A beat. Probably both are true." She caught herself smiling at the page, at a fraud indictment of all things, and hated that he'd noticed before she had. "You're smiling at a fraud indictment," he said, delighted, leaning forward like she'd handed him a gift. "I'm not smiling. You're smiling at me watching you read a fraud indictment like it personally offended you. Which is, for the record, very attractive." "I'm not attracted. I'm annoyed." "Same thing, in my experience." He said it easy, careless, like he tossed lines like that out constantly and never once worried whether they'd land. And then, just for a second, something flickered under it. Something that looked less like flirting and more like a man checking, quietly, whether anyone in this apartment full of lawyers and guards and locked doors was ever going to look at him like a person instead of a liability. She noticed it. She filed it away without meaning to. "You keep mispronouncing my name," she said instead, safer ground. "On purpose. Elizabeth." He drew it out, deliberately wrong, watching her over steepled fingers. "Elizabeth. Eliza. That's not even close. I know. You laugh every time, though." He said it like he'd caught her at something. She had in fact laughed every time. She hated that too. 2 hours passed before either of them noticed. 2 hours of clause-by-clause translation interrupted by his opinions on modern art. That painting cost more than your yearly salary, probably. And it's just gray. And his increasingly unhinged theories about what his lawyer actually did all day. And one long stretch of comfortable, unhurried quiet where she worked and he simply watched her work, like it was enough just to sit in a room with someone who wasn't afraid of him. When she finally checked her phone, the contracted time had come and gone by 112 minutes. She hadn't noticed her shoulders unclench. She hadn't noticed, until just now, that she'd laughed. Really laughed. The kind that came from somewhere underneath the version of herself she wore to work. For the first time in longer than she wanted to admit. She stood too fast, gathering her things with the particular urgency of someone caught doing something they hadn't meant to enjoy. "I should go. This was supposed to be one document." It was one document. He was still sitting, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite name. "You just read it very thoroughly, right?" She didn't look at him on her way to the door. She was fairly sure, if she did, she wouldn't leave. Behind her, low enough that she almost missed it, she heard him turn to Taehyun. "Keep her on retainer," Jae-won said. "Permanently. No arguments." Elizabeth stopped in the doorway, just for a second, just long enough for her heart to do something complicated, and then kept walking, because if she turned around now, she had no idea what her face would give away. She made it all the way to the elevator, before she let herself smile. She did not yet know that 4 floors below, in a black sedan idling at the curb, someone had already photographed her badge, her face, and the exact time she'd entered the building, and that by morning, her name would be in a file that had nothing to do with translation at all. By 1 a.m., there would be pizza boxes on his kitchen island, a stolen kiss neither of them planned, and a question Elizabeth wouldn't let herself ask out loud. How does a man accused of orchestrating violence make tea like he's done it for someone every night of his life? But it started 3 hours earlier, with a timestamp that didn't add up. Elizabeth sat cross-legged on the floor of her own apartment that afternoon, laptop balanced on a stack of law textbooks she hadn't opened since certification, and read the same line 4 times before she trusted it enough to be angry about it. The shipment log placed Jae-won's signature on a transfer authorization at 11:47 p.m. on the night in question. His own sworn statement, the one she'd translated herself, word by careful word, placed him at a dinner across the city until well past midnight. Someone was lying, and for the first time since she'd walked into that penthouse, she let herself consider that it might be him. She was back in the guarded elevator within the hour, files clutched to her chest, like evidence in a trial she hadn't agreed to prosecute. The penthouse at night wore a different face, warmer, dimmer, lamplight, instead of the gold glass glare of afternoon, the city outside gone to scattered embers. Jae-won looked up from the kitchen island when she came in, and whatever he saw on her face made the easy smile falter, just slightly, at the edges. "You look like you're about to arrest me," he said. "I might." She set the folder down hard enough to rattle the granite. "Your statement says you were at dinner until after midnight. The transfer log says you signed off on a shipment authorization at 11:47. Those two things cannot both be true, Jae-won." He didn't answer right away. He crossed instead to the kettle, filled it, set it on the stove with the unhurried precision of a man who needed his hands busy more than he needed to speak. "Are you seriously making tea right now?" "I make tea when I'm thinking." He didn't turn around. "You get frowny. I make tea. We all have our things. I didn't come here for tea. I came here because I need to know if I've spent the last week helping a man who's lying to me." That got him to turn. Something in his face had gone quiet, unguarded in a way she hadn't seen yet. Not the practiced charm, not the deflection. Just a man, standing in his own kitchen at 11 at night, looking cornered by a question he apparently hadn't expected to face from her. "I wasn't at that terminal," he said finally. "I don't know why the log says I was. I've been trying to figure that out for 3 weeks and getting nowhere. Which is," he exhaled, short, frustrated with himself more than her. "Which is not the answer you want. I know that. I don't have a better one. Then give me something." Her voice cracked on the last word, more than she meant it to. "Because right now, I'm sitting in your kitchen at 11 p.m., wondering if I'm an idiot." "You're not an idiot." He said it fast, immediate, like the idea of her thinking that mattered more than defending himself. Then quieter. I'm not good at this part. The part where I explain myself instead of just making the problem disappear. I've spent my whole life either being obeyed or being lied to. I don't actually know how to just tell someone the truth and trust they'll still be standing there after." The kettle screamed. He ignored it. Elizabeth felt something shift in her chest. Not suspicion draining away exactly, but softening into something else. "I don't trust people either," she said, and it surprised her how easily it came out. "Not really. Not since my dad. Everyone who says they're going to help ends up wanting something back. So I get it. The not trusting thing." She looked at him properly for the first time since walking in. "I just need you to not be one of those people. I don't want anything from you." His voice had dropped, rougher now. That's actually the problem, if you want to know. I keep waiting to want something from you. Some angle. Because that's how I understand people. And I don't. I just want you to stay in the room a little longer. That's it. That's the whole ask." Neither of them moved for a second. The kettle kept screaming, until he finally reached over and killed the burner, without looking away from her. It was Elizabeth who found it, 20 minutes later, both of them elbow-deep in pizza boxes and printouts spread across the island like a crime board neither of them had meant to build. "Wait," she went still. "Your calendar. The real one, not the lawyer-approved version. Do you still have access to it?" He pulled it up on his phone, slid it across to her without hesitation this time, and there it was, buried in a sync log neither the prosecution nor his own legal team had thought to check. A location ping from his phone, 11:44 p.m., 3 miles from the terminal. Dinner. Exactly where he'd said he was. "Someone used your signature without you," Elizabeth breathed. "This, Jae-won, this is it. This proves you weren't there. Say that again. You weren't there. This is an alibi. A real one, hiding in your own phone the whole time." He laughed, short, disbelieving, the sound of a man who hadn't let himself hope in weeks, finally allowing it in. "We just cracked open a fraud case with a location ping and a pizza box. I told you I was thorough. You did say that. I believed you, and I still underestimated you. He was closer now, she realized. Somewhere in the scramble of printouts, he'd ended up beside her, instead of across from her. Close enough that she could see the exact moment his eyes dropped, briefly, to her mouth, before dragging back up. You have, he reached up, tucked a strand of hair back from her face, slow, deliberate, his thumb grazing her cheekbone for half a second too long to be accidental. Sauce. On your face. From the pizza. That's not where the pizza was. No, he admitted. It wasn't. Neither of them moved. The kitchen had gone very quiet, the city lights outside doing their slow, indifferent shimmer, and Elizabeth was suddenly, acutely aware of how close his hand still was to her jaw. I should establish professional boundaries, he said, not moving an inch. You should, she agreed. Not moving either. I'm terrible at boundaries. I noticed. He laughed again. That same disbelieving sound. Right before he kissed her. And she was laughing too. Right up until she wasn't. Both of them undone by relief, and pizza grease, and 3 weeks of pretending this was just a job. Neither of them heard the elevator chime in the hallway below. Neither of them saw the black car that had been parked outside for 11 minutes, or the man inside it lowering his phone after a very clear photograph of the penthouse's lit windows. And neither of them yet knew that somewhere across the city, a woman named Director Han was staring at her own phone, reading a message that would put Elizabeth's name into a file she could never talk her way out of. She found the proof by accident, the way you find out about a cheating boyfriend, not through some dramatic reveal, but through a payment confirmation email left open on a screen that wasn't supposed to be hers to read. By the end of the night, she'd have jollof rice on her fire escape and a man sitting beside her who hadn't said a single grand thing to fix it. Just showed up, which, it turned out, was the thing that actually worked. The email was still open on the agency's shared drive when Elizabeth logged in that morning. Director Han's account, left unlocked on the office desktop, a payment confirmation from an account she didn't recognize, subject line innocuous enough that she almost scrolled past it. Placement fee. Williams E. Choi shipping assignment. Her stomach dropped before her mind had even finished the sentence. She read it twice, then a third time, because surely, this wasn't what it looked like. A transfer, 3 weeks ago, the same week she'd been randomly selected for the Choi case. From a shell account, traced, 2 clicks later, back to a name she'd only heard once, spat out of Jae-won's mouth like something bitter. Min Sok. The fluorescence in the office buzzed overhead, harsh and flat, draining the color out of everything. Elizabeth's hands had gone cold around the edge of the desk. She could hear her own pulse too loud in her ears, could feel the specific nausea of realizing that the last 3 weeks, the laughing, the pizza, the kiss she still hadn't told anyone about, had started with someone deciding, coldly, that she was useful. Director Han walked in 40 minutes later to find Elizabeth standing exactly where she'd left her, laptop screen still glowing. You were paid to put me on this case. Elizabeth's voice came out flat, stripped of everything except the effort it took to keep it steady. Weren't you? Han didn't deny it. That was almost worse than a lie would have been. It's not what you don't. Elizabeth's hands had curled into fists at her sides, nails biting half-moons into her palms. Don't tell me what it is. I already know what it is. You sold me. You looked at my file and decided I was, what, inexperienced enough? Desperate enough? And you sold me to the highest bidder like I was a... Elizabeth, I trusted you. Her voice cracked on the word trusted, and she hated it. Hated that it cracked. Hated that after everything, after her father, after learning the hard way that no one helps you without a price, she'd let herself believe Han was different. I actually trusted you. She didn't wait for an answer. She grabbed her bag and walked out, before Han could construct whatever sentence was supposed to make this survivable, before the tears building hot behind her eyes could fall in front of a woman who didn't deserve to see them. She made it 3 blocks before her hands started shaking, and 6 before she gave up pretending she wasn't crying, ducking into an alley to press her back against cold brick and just breathe. Her phone had been buzzing in her pocket since she left the office. 14 missed calls. She'd blocked the number somewhere around call number 9, in the blind, humiliated fury of a woman who couldn't tell anymore who in her life was real. By the time she got home, up 4 flights to the tiny apartment with the fire escape that was the only outdoor space she had, the city sprawled orange and indifferent below her, she'd unblocked him. She didn't examine why. She was still sitting on the fire escape 40 minutes later, knees pulled to her chest, when she heard footsteps on the metal stairs below. "You could have called," she said, without turning around. "I did." Jae-won's voice, slightly out of breath, a takeout bag rustling in his hand. 14 times? You blocked me. I unblocked you an hour ago. I know. He climbed the last few steps and settled beside her, careful, giving her space she hadn't asked for, and was grateful for anyway. "I was already in the cab." She looked at him then. Really looked. Golden streetlight catching the tired lines around his eyes. The way he held the takeout bag like an offering he wasn't sure she'd accept. "What is that? Jollof rice? I asked Taehyun to find out what your favorite was, and he apparently interrogated your building's doorman for 20 minutes to get an answer, so..." He set the bag between them. This better be right, or a grown man's dignity was wasted for nothing. She let out a laugh that came out half-sob, and didn't fight it when the tears finally spilled over. It's right. He didn't reach for her. He didn't fill the silence with reassurances or apologies that weren't his to give. He just sat, shoulder a careful few inches from hers, and let her cry it out against a skyline neither of them was really looking at. "I don't know how to say this," she said finally, voice raw, without sounding like an idiot. "But the worst part isn't even that she did it. It's that I keep thinking, what if that's it? What if that's the only reason any of this," she gestured vaguely between them, between the fire escape and the last 3 weeks, "happened at all? What if I was just convenient for both of you? You weren't convenient for me." His voice had gone low, none of the usual charm in it, just something plain and unguarded. "You were inconvenient. Deeply. I had an entire legal strategy built around not trusting anyone, and then you sat in my kitchen and told me you didn't trust people either, and I just..." He shook his head. "I wasn't supposed to want you to stay. That wasn't the plan." Elizabeth wiped her face with the back of her hand, some of the tightness in her chest finally loosening. "I'm not quitting the case," she said, and it surprised her how sure she sounded. "Not because of you. Because I'm not going to let Min-suk decide what I do with my own life. He wanted this to break something. I'm not giving him that." "Good." A pause. "Also, selfishly, I would have fought very hard to keep you anyway. You'd have lost. Probably." He smiled, small and real. "Still would have tried." They ended up at the restaurant 2 nights later. His idea, a ridiculous overcorrection of an apology dinner that neither of them needed but both secretly wanted. Candlelight and too much wine. And Jae-won standing up halfway through the meal, glass in hand, to loudly and unnecessarily announce to a mostly empty dining room that Elizabeth Williams was, as of tonight, officially, completely, and non-negotiably his. "You didn't have to do a toast," she said, laughing, mortified, delighted. "I did, actually. I've never had a girlfriend before. I looked it up. Toasts are traditional. You looked up girlfriend etiquette. I looked up a lot of things." He was already pulling her up out of her seat, one hand at her waist, forgetting entirely about the wine, the check, the 2 remaining staff members trying very hard not to watch. Most of them involved you. She didn't remember deciding to kiss him. She just remembered his laugh against her mouth, warm and unguarded, and the sound of the last waiter, finally, mercifully, deciding to give them the room. Neither of them noticed the man at the bar 3 tables back, nursing a drink he never finished, phone angled just slightly too carefully toward their table, who left the moment they did, already dialing a number Elizabeth wouldn't recognize until it was far too late to matter. The elevator doors weren't supposed to open for another hour. That was the whole plan. Elizabeth and Jae-won had exactly 60 minutes carved out that morning for nothing more dangerous than coffee and an argument about whether pineapple belonged on pizza. Instead, at 9:58 a.m., the elevator chimed, and out stepped Min-suk, 2 prosecutors, a court reporter, and enough legal weight to turn a Tuesday morning into the most dangerous hour of Elizabeth's professional life. This is a surprise deposition. Min-sok's voice arrived before he did. Smooth and clipped. The kind of voice that had never once had to raise itself to be obeyed. Fully within our rights, given the ongoing proceedings. I trust that isn't a problem. The penthouse, gold and golden lit an hour ago, seemed to shrink under fluorescent white deposition lamps someone had wheeled in without asking. Jae-won's easy morning posture vanished the second the elevator doors parted, his spine straightened, his jaw set, the barefoot, joke-cracking man from Chapter 1 folding itself away behind something colder, more careful. Elizabeth recognized the shift because she'd made the same one herself, 100 times, walking into courtrooms where a single wrong word could cost someone everything. Ms. Williams. Min-sok's eyes found her the moment he crossed the threshold, and something in his smile sharpened. How convenient. The interpreter and the girlfriend, all in one very efficient package. Elizabeth's pulse spiked. Not fear exactly, something closer to the cold clarity of a soldier hearing the first shot. She set her laptop down without letting her hands shake, met his eyes, and did not look at Jae-won. "I'm the certified interpreter of record for this case," she said, even, professional, betraying nothing. "If you have a concern about my qualifications, Mr. Choi, I'd invite you to file it with the agency. In writing, so there's a record. I have a concern about your objectivity." He said it lightly, like he was discussing weather, taking his seat across the marble table with the ease of a man who believed he'd already won. It's difficult to trust a translation from someone sleeping with the defendant. The room went very still. Elizabeth felt heat rise up her neck. Not embarrassment, fury. The particular kind that came from being reduced to a rumor in front of people paid to write down every word. She didn't look at Jae-won. She looked at Min-suk, and she smiled, small, sharp, unbothered in a way she had to manufacture from nothing but sheer will. "That's an interesting strategy," she said. "Attacking the interpreter instead of the evidence usually means the evidence isn't going well for you. A beat, letting it land. But please, continue. I'll translate every word of it faithfully. That's the job." One of the prosecutors coughed to cover a laugh. Min-suk's jaw tightened by a fraction. Barely visible, but Elizabeth caught it. Filed it away the way she'd learned to catalog every flinch in a room that could turn on her. Under the table, out of anyone's line of sight, she felt the toe of Jae-won's shoe pressed gently against hers. Not a rescue. Just a hand held out where no one could see it. She pressed back, once, and kept her eyes forward. The questioning ran long, brutal in its precision. Min-sok's team circling the same transfer authorization from Chapter 2, again and again, looking for the crack that would let the whole story collapse. Elizabeth translated every hostile question exactly as asked, refusing to soften a single syllable, because the moment she started protecting Jae-won in the room, she'd hand Min-sok exactly the compromised interpreter narrative he wanted. The real tension wasn't whether Jae-won was guilty. Elizabeth had stopped wondering that somewhere around a kitchen island and a pizza box, the tension coiled tighter around a different question. Whether Min-suk's people, watching her that closely, would realize just how much she actually knew. How close she'd come to the shell accounts. How close she was, now, to being a liability instead of an asset. Her hands stayed steady on the keyboard. Her voice stayed level, clause after clause, hostile question after hostile question. But under the table, her knee had begun a small, involuntary tremor she prayed the marble hid. Then Jae-won reached into his jacket, unhurried, and set his phone on the table, screen up, angled toward the prosecutors. "Before we continue," he said, voice even, controlled, "I'd like to enter something into the record. A location ping from the night in question. 11:44 p.m., 3 miles from the terminal. My signature allegedly authorized a transfer from..." He didn't look at Min-suk. He looked at the lead prosecutor, steady, patient, a man laying down a card he'd been holding for exactly this moment. "I'd invite your technical team to verify the metadata. I have no objection to independent analysis." The room shifted. Elizabeth watched it happen in real time. The lead prosecutor leaning forward, the court reporter's fingers slowing, and Min-suk's face doing something he clearly hadn't practiced hiding. The specific, unmistakable flicker of a man watching his own certainty crack down the middle. "That proves nothing," Min-sok said. Too fast. It proves I wasn't where your evidence says I was, Jae-won said. Which was, I believe, the entire basis of this deposition. Nobody spoke for a long moment. Then the lead prosecutor closed her folder with a soft, final click, and said the two words Elizabeth had been holding her breath for since the elevator opened. We're done here. Min-sok stood so fast his chair scraped against marble, and for the first time since he'd walked in, he didn't have a line ready. He gathered his people with sharp, clipped gestures, and by the time the elevator doors closed on his retreating back, he looked less like a man who'd lost a round and more like a man realizing, in real time, exactly how many more he was about to lose. The second the elevator light blinked shut, Jae-won turned, crossed the room in 3 strides, and picked Elizabeth clean off the floor, one arm banded around her waist, spinning her once, laughing. All the careful control from the last 2 hours breaking apart at once. You, he set her down, breathless, hands framing her face like he needed to check she was real. You destroyed him, without me saying a single word. The evidence isn't going well for you. I nearly laughed out loud in a deposition. I had a good teacher, she said, still catching her breath. Adrenaline and relief, tangled together so tightly, she couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. Terrible at boundaries, if I remember. Terrible, he agreed. Already closer, already forgetting every boundary either of them had ever pretended to want. She didn't remember deciding to kiss him this time either. Didn't remember the walk backward until her shoulders met the cool glass of the window. The city spread out gold and indifferent below them, his hands sliding into her hair, with none of the hesitation from that first night. This wasn't relief anymore. This was something hungrier, something that had been building since a barefoot man argued about rice cakes and made her laugh for the first time in a year. And neither of them made a single attempt to slow it down. It was, in fact, several very unhurried minutes later, breathless and laughing against his collarbone, that Elizabeth's phone began to buzz on the counter across the room. Insistent, relentless, the kind of buzzing that didn't stop until someone answered it. Neither of them moved to check it yet. But by the 4th call in 90 seconds, even Jae-won's certainty had started to falter, because whoever was calling clearly wasn't going to stop until one of them picked up, and something in the rhythm of it felt less like good news and a great deal more like a warning. The calls, it turned out, weren't the warning she'd braced for. They were worse, in a smaller, quieter way. The kind of worse that doesn't announce itself with sirens. It was a research assistant Elizabeth had hired weeks ago, back when she was still building Jae-won's defense clause by clause, calling to say she'd finally cross-referenced an old maritime safety filing against the shipping company's own internal records. The filing didn't match, and the mismatch had Jae-won's authorization on it. Clean, undisputed, no forgery this time. No frame-up, just him. She found the safety report herself 2 nights later, buried in a drive she'd been given full access to weeks ago and never had reason to open. A redacted incident report from a cargo vessel, 3 years old, a mechanical failure that could have killed the men working below decks if the timing had gone differently. And beneath it, a payment, buried in language dry enough to disguise what it actually was. A settlement, quiet, designed never to reach a courtroom or a headline. Jae-won's signature, Jae-won's authorization, not a frame, not Min-sok's fingerprints anywhere on it. Elizabeth sat with it a long time before she went to find him. He was on the balcony when she stepped out. City lights spread gold and glittering below the way they had been that very first night, though nothing about the two of them standing there felt the same anymore. He turned when the door slid open, and something in her face must have told him before she said a word, because the easy warmth he always wore for her flickered, just once, into something braced. You found it, he said. Not a question. I found it. She held the folder loosely, not like a weapon, not like evidence in a courtroom. Just paper. Just the truth, finally in her hands instead of his. 3 years ago, a ship, a safety violation you buried instead of reported. He didn't deny it. He didn't reach for a joke, didn't reach for her, didn't do any of the things she'd half expected. The charm that filled silences, The deflection that turned hard conversations into banter. He just stood there, hands braced on the railing, shoulders drawn tight, looking out at the city like it might have an answer he didn't. I was going to tell you. His voice had none of its usual ease. I kept finding reasons it wasn't the right night. And then it became the right night for so long that I stopped believing there was one. I'm not scared of you, Jae-won. She said it gently, no accusation in it, crossing the balcony to stand beside him instead of across from him. I need you to hear that first. I'm not standing here trying to figure out how dangerous you are. I already know exactly what kind of man you are. I just need you to stop deciding, on your own, what parts of yourself I'm allowed to see. He turned to face her then, and for the first time since she'd met him, barefoot, laughing, infuriating, careful never to let anyone see past the charm, his expression had nothing armored left in it at all. I authorized that settlement because I was 26 and terrified, he said, the words coming faster now, like something finally breaking loose. My father built this company on the idea that problems get buried, not solved. I didn't know how to run it any other way yet. Men could have died, Elizabeth. Because I chose the quiet option instead of the right one. And I have spent 3 years telling myself that if I never said it out loud, it would stop being true. His jaw worked, throat tight. I'm not innocent. Not the way you want me to be. Not the way I want to be, for you. I didn't fall for a perfect man. Her hand found his, steady, deliberate, the same gesture from a kitchen island weeks ago, except this time, she was the one reaching first. I fell for a man who's trying. That's it. That's the whole thing I signed up for, whether either of us said it out loud yet or not. She squeezed his hand. So let me actually help you finish trying. No more deciding for me what I can handle. His breath left him like something physical, like a held weight finally set down. He pulled her in, forehead against hers, and for a long moment, neither of them said anything at all, just breathed, together, the city humming quietly below. She testified 2 weeks later. The whole truth this time, not the careful, protective version Jae-won might once have asked for, but everything, laid out plain in front of a board that had been waiting, quietly, for exactly this kind of ammunition. It cost him the company. He stepped down before the board could force the vote, standing in front of cameras with a steadiness Elizabeth recognized now as something harder won than confidence, the look of a man finally choosing honesty over control, even when it cost him everything his father had built. It also, finally, cost Min-sok every last piece of leverage he'd spent months constructing. There was nothing left to blackmail a man who'd already told the truth first. 3 weeks after that, Elizabeth found Jae-won sprawled dramatically across her tiny apartment's one good armchair, scrolling his phone with the specific despair of a man who had never, in his entire adult life, had an unstructured afternoon. I don't know what to do with myself, he announced, like it was a tragedy. I have no board meetings, no depositions, no ankle monitor. I tried to have a crisis this morning, and there was nothing to be in crisis about. That's called Tuesday, Elizabeth said, not looking up from her book. Most people call it relaxing. It's boring. He said it like a confession. Deeply, catastrophically boring. I think I need a hobby. You have a hobby. It's bothering me. That's not a hobby. That's a vocation. He tossed the phone aside, rolled off the chair, and crossed to where she sat, folding himself down beside her with the same unhurried ease he'd had that very first night, barefoot in a penthouse, arguing about rice cakes. Marry me. She looked up sharply. That's not a real proposal. You don't get to slide that into an argument about your boredom. I'm aware. He was smiling now. That same delighted, startled smile from the first day she'd walked into his life. Like she was still, after everything, the best surprise he'd ever been handed. Consider it a rough draft. I'll do it properly eventually. Ring, speech, the whole terrible spectacle. I just wanted to see your face when I said it. And? Worth it. He pulled her in, unhurried, certain, the city outside her window doing its slow, indifferent shimmer the way it always had, except now there was nothing dangerous left circling either of them. Just two people who'd told each other the truth and stayed anyway. Ask me properly sometime, she murmured against his mouth, and I'll actually say yes. Noted, he said, already not listening. already kissing her again. And this time, for the first time since a black car had photographed her badge outside a guarded door in an alley off Cheongdam-dong, there was no one left watching from the street below.